Hello, hi. My name is Karen Devro, and welcome to Conversations with Karen. Now, this one is going to be a quick one, and it's not as random as it may seem. However, I am currently reading two books, and one is for emotional intelligence, and the second one is to try and improve my IQ. Right? And the book that I'm currently reading is Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Y. Davis. Now, Angela Davis is an American activist and political scientist, and she wrote a book in 2003 about whether or not prisons as a system are still effective. Now, understandably, it's within the American context, but even as I read through it, I tried to apply my mind to the South African context just to see whether or not, because I know one thing about the South African prison system, it is rehabilitative in nature. So the idea is, even if people have gone against or broken society's norms and rules, they do still have a chance to be better. They are given tools to be better, and then they are put back into the world. Because I feel like, based on the amazing constitution that we have in South Africa, we don't see it as something that is long term, as much as your more vile, violent, gruesome, really heartbreaking cases, obviously, lock them up and throw away the key. But there's a lot of references that Angela Davis obviously makes with regards to people that are in long-term prison sentences without the death penalty, without the hope of. Isn't it weird to say that somebody doesn't have the hope of a death penalty? Because it also means that they're just going to be in prison indefinitely. At least with a death penalty sentence, there's an end point, right? With that being said, I have notes. So as I was reading, I had notes because I didn't want to forget. Now, the reason why this is not as random as it may seem is I have got family members that are in jail. These family members happen to be all on my mom's side, and they all happen to be like murder cases. Really, really sad. It really was devastating to the family, when it happened. So no, this is not a story time. This is about prisons. Obviously, one I think is still pending. That was a very heartbreaking situation. And another one, it was years ago. I think we are solid like 20 years in, if he's not going to be up for parole now, with a cousin of mine. We were similar ages. He was like a year or two younger than me. Anyway, Angela Davis. Are prisons obsolete? Okay. So here's the thing that she does a lot of comparisons to, and she goes back into the history, South African Black American history, and looks at whether or not institutions such as slavery, segregation, and lynching. Now, apparently these are three different things that happened. Slavery, obviously, purchasing of human bodies and completely having no rights. Segregation, where limited rights were then offered, but people were lived separately. There were different standards that were offered to them. And then lynching, and I think this was where you were allowed to, it was a form of punishment that whites could then bestow on Black Americans. So she looks at these three institutions, and she looks at the prison system currently. Very importantly, she goes through a history of how, for the first 100 years in the history of California, 9 prisons were built. And then you enter what they call the Reagan era of the 80s. And from the mid-70s until the 90s, there were over 70 prisons built in the state of California. More than double in a tenth of the time, which shows you just how institutionalized the prison system is. They also talk about, and we're going to get to it because I'm jumping, what do they call the industrial prison complex. Ooh, child. the amount of industries that make money off the incarceration of black bodies in America. You know, when you start reading, you start to say, hey, that there's things happening here in the world. Okay. Then she looks at the fact that as much as I'm talking about, there is an experience within my family of having to go through the justice system and then being incarcerated for a long period of time for a really, really terrible crime. She talks about how we cannot pretend as if the prison system and the justice system is not part of our everyday life. We consider it to be far removed because either we've never been incarcerated or we don't know anybody that's currently long-term in jail, and there's a difference between apparently jail and prison, the pen and federal prison, but that's an American like differentiation. But yes, she talks about how we feel as if we are far removed from it because it's not maybe part of our everyday life. Even the way prisons are situated, it's giving more outskirts. However, in South Africa, because tell me why, is Sun City, smack bang in the south. You come off the highway, you're looking at Sun City. C-Max, the same thing, when you're driving into Pretoria, coming from Joburg Centurion. You drive into the CBD, there used to be the big postal service, C-Max. So not so much, but then you get the private prisons, for example, Leeuwkop, which is in the north of Johannesburg. Those are for your white collar or / non-violent crimes. You have those ones that are a little bit more tucked away. Anyway, that's location. I digress. She's saying sometimes we feel it's far removed, but it's actually not, because through Hollywood and the media, we literally watch movies. Shawshank Redemption, shame she listed it. I don't have prison movies listed right now. But she lists these movies and she says this does not necessarily create a deterrent for prisons, right? Watching how tough it is or Breakout. I mean, there were a whole series. What was that thing called? With, I won't be able to move on. The guy that was in the We Belong Together video with Mariah. Was it Breakout? Breakaway? I'm gonna remember. Oh, I'm gonna have to go Google it. So it's not necessarily a deterrent, right? Because there's whole genres. It talks about how they've also racialized crime. Now we can bring this definitely into the South African context. She also speaks about how crime has now been assigned a color. And if there's one thing in South Africa we know, perfect example, the very, very devastating and unfortunate death of Reeva Steenkamp. But what was Oscar Pistorius's excuse? Black intruders. Do we remember the Breedenkamp case? Yeah, in wealthy Stellenbosch, where that young boy hacked his family to death. And who did he blame? Black intruders. Let's even talk about when we transitioned from apartheid into a democratic South Africa. There was fear-mongering that happened in the 90s. It was called what? Swart Gevaar. Historically, in any sort of country that had to fight for their independence, where black bodies were controlled by a white minority, in our case, majority in the US case, you see that crime has been assigned a color. In America, it's about black boys and girls being raised, you know, how to take care of themselves when they stop by the police, not have the hoodie, not have to, you know, not have to be aggressive in any, because they get shot. They get killed. That side. So blackness is the color of crime, right? You impute crime to color and not character. Cases where white people were, they even have cases, we haven't gotten theirs yet. We just blame the imaginary black. In the States, they used to literally make blackface, go and commit crime, because even if somebody was just vaguely going to see, they're going to say, black person. Guys, Central Park 5. Hey, people were so quick to believe because it was a white woman that was crying. But hey guys, whites have concluded that blacks cannot work unless they are subject to intense surveillance and discipline. There is this innate thing within the Caucasian community, and this is not a platform for not all whites. Please stop it right now. Someone stop, unsubscribe. That is not this channel, okay? Whites have concluded that blacks cannot work unless subject to intense surveillance and discipline. Because in 2026, dare I say corporate South Africa. Because who are our managers? Who are the owners of the... But never keep quiet because I'm employed. It really went left. She also discusses convict labor. Now there is this leasing system that happens where they are able to take... Guys, where people... Because now you lose your rights. And we're going to talk about voting rights and universal suffrage. Because in South Africa, it's a very different situation. But we're talking about the leasing system because you lose some of your rights because you've decided that you cannot engage and conduct yourself as a safe member of society. We remove rights. We incarcerate you, we remove you, and we remove some rights, right? This is also led, and this ties back to the prison industrial complex, where they lease out labor. Now, I've seen it before. Now, you'll see them in their prison gear. They would maybe be... on the side of the road, busy doing maintenance. They're working on the roads, or they'll be working, like doing gardening on the highways in Gouta. Guys, it's government contracts. Hey, they take these people. Apparently, there's payment. I have to research this. I did not research this before I pressed record. I don't know if it's a very low rate, because to make people work without paying them is actually slavery. And our constitution wouldn't allow. So I feel like it's a stipend, but like the bare minimum, like 10 rand something an hour, some ridiculous number. Anyway, we lease our bodies to do work. So I'm not going to talk about that. But let's talk about the losing of certain rights. So this I did Google because I wanted to know in America. So certain states, because remember in American law, there's federal law, which the national government, if I'm going to put it in their terms, and then there's state law. So each province. Now in South Africa, it's a tiered approach, right? So you've got provincial, you've got local government, which is each little town's government. You've got provincial, which is each province's, and then you've got national government. And as much as each may work with its own budgets and its rules and stuff with it, they all tie in. So local can't implement things that's not on a provincial level. National will implement things and everybody has to implement. So it's a tiered approach to government. America doesn't have that. So it does depend on the state that you are in, but some states, there's limited voting rights, and in others there aren't. It actually recently, I think in 2024, again came before our constitutional court as to whether or not prisoners should be allowed to vote. And I stand corrected, don't come and drag me. If I stand corrected, certain categories of prisoners cannot vote in South Africa, which means it depends on what you are in prison for. That's all I'm going to say about that, because we've got, our constitution is literally tea. Anyway, I'm going to be late. I have to go. I'm nicely halfway through reading this book, and I'm going to continue reading it because I believe we need to be able to have conversations about things other than men, liquor, and babies. No shade, but all the shade. Bye.